1950, Princeton University. A 22-year-old mathematician submits a 27-page doctoral dissertation. In those 27 pages, he solves one of the oldest problems in human civilization. How do rational actors behave when their decisions depends on what everybody else decides? His name is John Nash. His solution becomes the Nash equilibrium. It earns him the Nobel Prize. It becomes the foundation of modern game theory. It shapes how we understand markets, wars, alliances, and behavior of states. Let's go back to 300 BCE in Patliputra, the capital of the greatest empire the Indian subcontinent had ever seen. In there exists a man who is simultaneously a professor, a spy master, a kingmaker, and a political philosopher. He sits down and writes what will become a 6,000 words treatise on statescraft. His name is Kautilya. We know him as Chanakya. And buried in that treatise is what he called the Arthashastra. It is a formal solution to the Nash equilibrium 2050 years before Nash was born. Today, we are going to do something that no Indian YouTube channel has ever done before. We are going to read the Arthashastra the way Chanakya wrote it, not as collection of any life lessons, not as a source of LinkedIn quotes, not as ancient wisdom to be admired from a distance, but as a formal theory of power, a systems document, a manual of mechanism design. And when we do that, something remarkable actually happens. The 20th century stops looking like it invented political science. It starts looking like it actually caught up. But before we go into the theory, you will need to understand two specific things. First, what is Arthashastra? Not what it contains, what kind of a document is it? See, Arthashastra is a collection of close to 15 books, has around 150 chapters, roughly 6,000 sutras. It covers topics and subjects like taxation, military strategy, espionage, law, agricultural policy, trade regulation, civil engineering, marriage law, mining, and also foreign policy. In other words, it is not a philosophical text like people paint it in your head. It is not any kind of spiritual guide. It is a systems manual for the design and operation of a state. Now, the second thing that you all need to understand is how the text actually disappeared and what did we do when we actually found that text. See, to give you a close context, for nearly 2000 years, the Arthashastra simply did not exist. It was known by name, but it was only referred in passing by other people's work. The actual manuscript itself was lost. Then, in 1905, a scholar named Shyama Shastri found a palm leaf manuscript in the library of the Mysore Oriental Research Institute. He actually spent 5 years translating it, and when he published his translation in 1905, Western scholars looked at it and had one reaction. They said it reads like Machiavelli, but Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1530. The Arthashastra predates it by nearly 1800 years. So here is the first crime. The Arthashastra was lost for 2000 years, and when it was found by a nation under an unfortunate colonial rule, a nation conditioned to see its own intellectual heritage as mythology, as religion or ancient wisdom, but never as solid, rigorous science. And we exactly did that. We extracted the quotable lines from the text, we printed them on motivational posters. To today's date, we put them on Instagram pages and call it Chanakya Niti. We did to Chanakya what we would have never dreamt to do to somebody like an Aristotle or Hobbes. We stripped him of his identical structure and kept only his aphorisms. This is the second crime, and today we're actually going to go ahead and undo it. At the center of Arthashastra is one of the most elegant ideas that we are going to discuss in the history of any political thought to ever exist. Chanakya calls it the Saptanga, which simply means 7 limbs. His claim is actually this: every state, every organized political entity consists of 7 interdependent variables. Remove any one of them and the entire system falls. Weaken any one of them and the others are affected immediately. The 7 are Swami, the quality of leadership at the top; Amatya, the caliber of the administrative class; Janapada, the population and the territory they inhabit; Durga, the physical security infrastructure of the state; Kosha, the treasury, fiscal capacity; Danda, the coercive apparatus, the army, the law; and finally, Mitra, the alliance network. Who are your friends? Now, look at these 7 variables again, but with modern contemporary labels. Swami actually is leadership quality. Amatya is the bureaucracy that we define in today's modern world. Janapada is demographics and territory. Durga is defense infrastructure. Kosha is fiscal capacity. Danda is military and rule of law. Mitra is foreign alliances. Chanakya was not describing a kingdom, he was describing every state that will ever go on to exist. But here's what makes this absolutely remarkable. Chanakya did not describe what a state is. Every political philosopher in the history does that if you actually closely observe. What Chanakya went on to do was he actually described what makes a state robust or fragile. He built a model in which every variable affects every other variable. The stability of the whole system depends on the health of each facelet. This is systems theory. The term systems theory was coined by Ludwig von in 1945. Chanakya was doing systems theory in 300 BCE, and here is the test of whether a theory is serious. Does it generate non-obvious predictions? The Saptanga does. Chanakya writes, a state with a weak treasury but strong alliances is more stable than a state with strong treasury but no alliances. Why? Because the Mitra, the alliance network, can substitute for fiscal and military weakness in a crisis. But fiscal strength without allies means you face every single crisis all by yourself. This is not a quote. This is a formal claim about how variables interact, and it is, to the best of my knowledge and ability, absolutely true. Now we get to the part that stopped me when I first understood it, right? Chanakya's theory of foreign policy is built around one concept. It is called the Raja Mandala, the circle of kings. Here is the theorem stated exactly as how Chanakya would actually state it and stated in his transcripts. The king who is immediately on the circumference of the conqueror's territory is the natural enemy. The king who is next to the immediate neighbor is the natural friend. Your neighbor, your immediate neighbor is actually your enemy. Your neighbor's neighbor is your friend. Their neighbor's neighbor is your enemy again, and so on in concentric circles of altering enmity and alliance. Take a minute, let that sink in. This is not some kind of cultural claim that I'm trying to make, or this is not an interpretation based on ancient Indian values. Chanakya is actually making a structural, geometric claim about how competitive systems actually work. Alliance and enmity are not moral categories that are competing against each other. They are fundamentally positional categories. Your relationship with another state is determined entirely by where you both sit in the competitive landscape. Now, let me show you why this is so identical to the Nash equilibrium. John Nash's problem was this. Imagine a competitive system where every single player is rational, meaning every player is actually trying to maximize their own payoff. No player can actually change their strategy and expect a better outcome given what everyone is doing around, right? Now, that state where no player wants to actually deviate, that is what Nash equilibrium describes. Now apply this to interstate relations. Every state wants to maximize its security and power relative to its neighbor. For example, if I am surrounded by potential rivals, the rational move is to neutralize the nearest threat by building alliances with states that are threatened by the nearest rival. In other words, to ally with my neighbor's neighbor against my neighbor. If every state is doing this simultaneously, the state equilibrium of the system looks exactly like this: alternating concentric ring of enemies and allies centered on every state simultaneously. That is the mandala. That is also what the Nash equilibrium said about positional competition. Same theory, just 2250 years apart. A lot of people are actually going to think that this is ancient history. Let me give you a fundamental example. Look at the map that I'm showing on the screen right now. India sits in the center if you're able to observe. Let's try to decode this. Look at the ring 1, the immediate neighbors of India. We've got Pakistan, we've got China, we've got Bangladesh, we've got Nepal, we've got Sri Lanka. Now, according to Chanakya's theorem, these are India's natural rivals, right? Because they share borders, they compete for the same strategic space. Let's go a step further and actually decode ring 2, the state that are beyond India's immediate neighbors. Let's take Vietnam, right, which shares a contested border with China again. Japan, which is in territorial dispute with China in the East China Sea. Let's take Australia, which sees China's naval expansion plan as a direct threat to its country. The United States, the most important, which is a structural rivalry with China for global primacy. Chanakya's theorem says these are India's natural friends, not because of shared values, not because of an ideology that everybody can agree upon, but because of absolute political geometry. Now tell me, isn't this not what is stated in the quadrilateral security? Isn't quadrilateral security about this? India, Japan, Australia and the United States, 4 democracies uniting together to form an alliance, but also 4 states each sitting in the ring 2 of relative to China. See, the quadrilateral security is not a Western alliance imposed on India. The quadrilateral security is the mandala in practice. Chanakya theorized this in 300 BCE. Indian foreign policy is still working out on how to actually implement this. In 1976, 2 economists named Michael Jensen and Michael Meckling published one of the most cited papers in the history of economics. They had a very interesting quote inside, and I want you to pay very close attention because I think this is absolutely interesting. Whenever you hire someone to act on your behalf, it can be a minister, it can be a manager, a bureaucrat, a CEO, or it can just be a freelancer, for example. You face a fundamental problem. They know more about what they are actually doing than you. And their interest is fundamentally not the same interests as yours. That is also very, very credible. So when they try to talk to you, right, in various degrees, they are going to try to use their information advantage to serve their own interest at your expense. See, the problem has 3 parts. 1. Information asymmetry. The agent knows more than the principal. 2. Misaligned incentive. The agent wants different things. 3. Monitoring cost. Watching the agent closely is expensive. This problem, named, formalized, and published in 1976, is one of the most important ideas in modern economics, and Chanakya had already solved it in 300 BCE in Book 1, Chapter 9 of the Arthashastra. Chanakya understood that the king's most dangerous vulnerability is not the enemy at the border, it is the minister inside the palace. His solution has 4 parts and it's very interesting. Allow me a minute and I'm going to explain. Part 1, selection by adversarial testing. Before appointing a minister, Chanakya prescribes 4 tests their response to dharma. What actually happens when religious temptation is offered? Tests with artha, what happens when a bribe is offered? Tests with kama, what happens when pleasure is used to manipulate? Tests with bhaya, what happens when they are threatened? Only a candidate who passes all 4 tests should be appointed. In modern terms, adversarial stress testing of an agent before actually delegating them in that particular position or designation, which in today's day and world is considered one of the best practices in organizational psychology across institutions and companies around the world. Part 2, independent verification networks. Chanakya prescribes a system of Guda Purusha, hidden persons, who monitor the behavior of officials and report it directly to the king. Structurally independent of the officials they actually monitor. In modern terms, the separation of audit from operations. This is why your auditor cannot be your accountant. Same principle. Chanakya formalized this 2300 years ago. Part 3, mandatory rotation of official. No official stays in the same role long enough to build a personal power base that competes with the state's interest. Now used in central banking, intelligence agencies, and judicial appointments. Part 4, overlapping jurisdictions. Multiple officials with partially overlapping responsibilities means that no single agent can actually get corrupt without another agent actually observing it. Redundancy as accountability, a key concept that system design actually teaches us today. In 2011, Leonard Horwich won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work on mechanism design, the science of designing incentive structures so that the rational, self-interested agents behave in ways that serve collective goals. Chanakya did not win a Nobel Prize. He built the largest empire in the Indian subcontinent using the same fundamental principles, and then he wrote them all down. There is one more theorem I want to actually show you, and this might be the most elegant of all, hands down. In 1960, an economist named Thomas Sealing published The Strategy of Conflict. He was thinking about nuclear deterrence specifically. When does a threat actually prevent the thing it actually threatens? Very deep question. His answer was counterintuitive. A threat only works if it is credible, and a threat is only credible if the person making it would actually carry it out, even at the cost of themselves. This is the paradox of deterrence. The stronger your threat, the more you need to prove you're committed to carry it through, because a purely rational actor would back down when the cost actually gets too high, and every single person knows this. So purely rational actor cannot deter. Only an actor who has committed credibly, visibly, irreversibly can deter. Schilling won the Nobel Prize for this insight in 2005. In Book 6 of Arthashastra, Chanakya describes the Shadgunya, the 6 instruments of foreign policy: peace, war, neutrality, marching, alliance, dual policy. But what is remarkable is not the list, it is the logic Chanakya uses to decide which instrument to apply when. He writes, a king should wage a war only when the benefits of the victory outweigh the costs of the defeat. But, and this is super crucial, a king must make his enemies believe He will fight regardless, because a king who is known to calculate before fighting invites aggression from enemies who believe they can win his calculations. The only safe position is to make your commitment to fight credible, by having fought before, by having armies visibly ready, by never backing down from a stated position without extracting a concession. This is word for word Sealing's theory of credible commitment, written 2260 years before Sealing's Nobel Prize. Let me actually tell you what we have actually done in the last 13 minutes. We have shown that the Arthashastra contains a formal system of model of the state 2245 years before systems theory, a geometric theory of interstate relations structurally identical to the Nash equilibrium 2250 years before Nash, a complete mechanisms design solution to the principal agent problem 2276 years before Jensen and Mechling, and a theory of credible deterrence 2260 years before Schilling. This is not coincidence. This is not Indians or India actually looking for pride in its ancient texts. Chanakya was working on the same fundamental problems that modern political science actually works on in today's day and age. He was working on them empirically, studying actual kingdoms, actual war, actual governance. And he was solving them with the highest form of formal logic. The only reason we didn't know about this is because we lost the text for 2000 years. And when we found it, we were not in a position to read it as science. We read it as heritage. There is a huge difference. Here is my bold claim. India's intellectual heritage has been systematically undervalued, not by the West, but by Indians themselves. We have turned Chanakya into a quote machine. We have turned Arthashastra into a self-help book. We have taken the world's first formal treatise into mechanism designs and made it into a poster of an MBA student's wall. And in doing so, we have denied ourselves something far more valuable than the pride in ancient accomplishment. We have denied ourselves the actual analytical tools the text contains. Because here's one thing, the problems Chanakya solved are still unsolved in India today. The principal's agent problem in Indian bureaucracy, the credible commitment problem in Indian foreign policy, the system fragility of Indian government institutions. He gave us the frameworks. We turned them into Instagram quotes. That is the real loss. The Arthashastra was lost for nearly 2000 years. When it was rediscovered in 1905, India was under the British colonial rule. I want you to sit with one question, not as history, as a systems question. What else has been lost? What other systematical, analytical thinking from the Indian intellectual tradition is buried in archives, reduced to mythology, or waiting to be read the way it was written? Not as ancient wisdom, not as any cultural heritage, but as rigorous science. Because if one text found in a palace library almost by accident contains the Nash equilibrium, mechanical design and deterrence theory simultaneously, then the question is not how impressive was ancient India. The real question is, what are we still not reading correctly? Let that sink in, and I'll see you in the next video.